All right, we are back with another episode. Come together, hey everybody. Couple of updates. Number one, I have a bunch. I have at least at least a half dozen confirmed unexciting guests. Now it's just a matter of kind of working with their schedule. So I'll be putting out different episodes. Um, more. I'll put out more solo ones if there's more time in between when when I'm able to actually make the episodes happen with the guests and consistently putting out more content. So just a heads up, you got some fun names to look forward to. I'm waiting to hear back from other people, but a bunch of fun and cool confirmations. So I'm excited about that. It's been a good week. Long week. I flew to New York on Monday and landed at midnight, um, and then yesterday, Tuesday, I flew back. I caught a 4 o'clock flight. My sister had a baby boy, and so I came in for the bris, the Jewish circumcision celebration, which was beautiful and very emotional. It's always very emotional. I find all these events where you keep some kind of tradition or religious chain alive and growing, and you're an active participant in it. I mean, I think there is an experience. It's cool that you can have different types of awesome experiences. When I say awesome, I don't mean like cool. I mean literally AWE, awe, as in to be in awe of something and to be observing or participate in something greater than yourself. And then awesome, that's like really where the word comes from. But we, we usually it used to be when you say the word awesome, it was you were in awe of something that was really cool. Uh, However, now we just use it as something that's cool. This was really, I think, so. There's different types of awesome experiences that we can have, and some of them is when you're in nature or you're overlooking nature, and it's cool because it tends people tend to have this experience when looking at over the ocean or from the top of a mountain, and they they feel like like, oh my god, look how beautiful and big this world is, and I'm just a speck. And if sometimes you look into the night sky, it's just as beautiful or enticing, and you're like, I'm just part of something so beautiful and so big and so wonderful. And while you yourself might feel a little smaller than you might typically feel, you also feel like you're participating in part of something really big, and that's a really cool feeling. And I think that we actually we love that feeling. People, I believe, have a tendency to we enjoy that experience, and we find those experiences meaningful, deep. We find them important and significant, which is really cool. And then there's also a more cultural type of awesome, or a cultural type of awe, where you find yourself in a tradition, or you find yourself in a group, or in a culture, or in a philosophy that has been going on for a long time, and there's almost like camaraderie and brotherhood in it, which is and it's beautiful because you find you consider yourself a link in the chain. You consider yourself you know another part of something that is important, something that is big, and something that can accomplish and achieve more than you as yourself as an individual can ever achieve. Um, I'm really excited about here with this conversation, of course, because I usually end up I usually come up with bullet points of things I'm interested in talking about, and then I kind of just talk, and sometimes I get to it, sometimes I don't. Um, but I was, feeling of awesomeness. Oh man, I just lost my train of thought just now. Oh yes. So, I started learning some some Torah, some Judaism with Jewish concepts in philosophy and literature with my cousin. I learn every day, and I have for the last over the last 10 years, but actually probably closer to 12 or 13 years at this point. But And you know, and I think, and I find it beautiful. I find it grounding. I find it to be good. I find it to be ever relevant, and also based on the point of my life that I'm in, I actually pick up different things and find different degrees of direction and advice based on where I am in life when I'm re-examining it, which is really really cool. Um, you know, because I guess a work that is so, you know, the Torah, which is so nuanced and so articulate and so jam packed with stories of the human condition, and not just the adult condition, not just the child condition, but like every phase in life, you know, male, female, husband, you know, a father, a son, a mother, a daughter, cousin, like all these interrelate, you know, a person that works the land, a person that is just a businessman or a scientist or a doctor, you know, and you know, and how to navigate through different points in life. There's stories about all that, and so when I revisit it, I read the whole thing through once a year, and as I go through it, I'm every year I'm generally at a relatively different point in my life. You know, whether it's just being married or being married for a little while with a kid, or being married with a kid and with two kids, or being, you know, single, or dating, or being engaged, or not sure where I want to go with my career. I'm not sure, you know, what it takes to get work done, and if I'm going to have to do hard work, what should my attitude be while I'm doing that? All that kind of thing, all those kinds of stuff, all these kind of, you know, really, um, you know, these life, these important, these valuable, these are the things that we live for, that we live about. This is why we're alive. All the direction and how to navigate that there. And so it's you know, I find it extremely valuable to revisit all the time. And you know, so my cousin, who Adam, who has been on the podcast before, friend of the podcast, as they say these days, friend of the show. He, you know, he and I have, you know, we grew up, we're very close together. We're very close to one another, both, you know, in proximity and in terms of being close to each other. And, and then, you know, and so as we kind of made our way through our life, you know, we would, you know, we'd be in touch about, you know, we'd be in touch about different things that we were figuring out and different things that we were going through, and we'd travel together and we'd hang out and be in touch. And so at a certain point, I was, you know, he and I started learning together, and it was really, really nice. You know, it's been, you know, and life is busy, and life comes and goes, and you know, it's all a journey. But he asked me recently to pick it up again, so we have been, which has been phenomenal. And you know, we started basically from the beginning of Genesis, of Bereshit, at the beginning of the Torah of the Old Testament. And one thing that we're talking about, which is actually going to connect to everything I was just talking about for the last 5 minutes until now, is you know, we're philosophically, you know, every statement is essentially something that could be questioned, that should be questioned and challenged and considered and thought about, you know, and generally speaking, there are there's good reason for why everything is there, or at least you can kind of figure out, offer different understandings, and provide different reasonings. Um, and one thing that we're talking about in the Genesis story is the notion that, and if you're not familiar, you know, there's different, you know, obviously 6, 7 days of creation, and throughout those days, God, you know, different things manifest, and God watches as everything comes to existence, comes to being, and God would God would intervene or direct or recommend ideas or advice based on um, based on what in his, with a capital H's, divine, you know, knowledge, um, you know, you know, encourages him to do. And it's interesting because there is a famous story of how Adam was created by himself, and you know, and there's different stories. about, and philosophically, obviously, there's a lot of depth to this, but he's wandering around the Garden of Eden and he's working, and we don't really know what it means that he's working because at the time, I don't know what he needed to work. He's in the Garden of Eden. There's fruit, there's plants, there's a bunch of different answers, different perspectives, but eventually he becomes lonely, and eventually he becomes he realizes that something's missing in his life, and he went to each animal and was trying to see if there's any kind of relationship that he could have, any kind of meaningful or valuable relationship that he could have with them. And the ultimate conclusion was that no animals were able to really do it for him. No animals were really able to provide him a sense of the sense of fulfillment that, or I guess to would fill that need that he was experiencing. And so he prayed, went to bed. God, while he was sleeping, God created Chava, or his Eve, his first wife, um, and it's interesting because you know there would, like, if man needed to have relationships, right, and it's built into our DNA. And we could talk about what that means, I mean, and I think all this still like applies. You can apply the same knowledge evolutionarily, or like through like, I mean, I really, really do not believe that science and religion are at odds with one another, and I think that's a pretty outdated idea to think so, personally. But so like if God, there had to be a purpose, especially in this biblical story where every detail makes a difference. If man needed to have a relationship, then why didn't God start by creating two people? And if man didn't need that relationship, then what happened and what changed that he would actually need it? Um, in other words, God should have created just man, Adam and Eve at the same time, Adam and Chava at the same time, or he should have created, Adam, and then, and he didn't, and he wouldn't have needed a partner. If he was created by himself, then that's all he would have needed. And my cousin and I were talking about this, and one of the things that we were saying was that humans don't appreciate what we have, um, until we don't have it, and then when we notice that we need something, that's kind of when we're incentivized to go out and get it. And I think it's true that most great forms, most great success has come out of a place of desperation or pain, or there had to have been some kind of, for most stories of success, for most individual success at least, meaning someone could inherit success, but they're not looked at the same way unless they accomplish their own thing. They need to accomplish their own individual goal, and their individual goal might be something totally separate from what their initial success was in. So if someone comes from a family of, let's say, esteemed academics, um, and this person, you might argue, well, might have an easier time getting to Harvard, or getting to wherever his family went to college, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, whatever. But um, but for him to really be considered great, he'd have to kind of pave his own way in whatever he was doing. He might have to branch off and do his own research. He might have to say, you know what, it's not enough that that I'm an academic. I have to I have to build something creative, or build a business, or build, a school, or I have to do something for myself. And even though he had a leg up, in order for him to feel remembered, or feel valuable, or to really have an impact on the world around him, and for anyone to take notice of him, he would have to experience some kind of hardship and discover his own way of being. You can't hand someone you can't. I don't think success could be handed over. Success is something that's worked on. Money can be handed over, but success, I don't think, could not inherently be. And so And a lot of times we have to, in order to be successful, we have to kind of feel what are we missing out on in our lives. And then I really do believe that, we're all extremely, extremely intuitive. And I think that we do have in our nature, there's something that will bite you that when you're experiencing it, you're starting to experience it, and you have this passion and this enthusiasm, and and then you do that act. Um, then you do that act, and then you walk away, and you literally feel elevated. You feel like a different human being. But it can't, and you might have hit a really low point prior to that where you just didn't know what it was that you were going to do. I guess to give a to just to be more specific and not be so philosophical or conceptual, I again I've said this countless times, but I do sales and I do this podcast and I I had to do some really hard. I don't. It's hard to do the reaching out to strangers to try to get people onto a podcast. And I've had some success with it, which has been a lot of fun. But it always takes me. It's always hard for me to get myself to send an initial email to sit down in front of the computer and find someone that'd be interested in talking with me. And I really I don't like to do it. It's really hard for me. And then, I forced myself, at a certain point when the pipeline's running dry, I do a bunch of solo episodes, and I don't have any guests coming out in the near future. I gotta sit down. So if I'm really serious about this, and I really do enjoy this, which I do, and I want to grow, and I want to keep it up, and I want to be successful, then you're gonna have these crappy things that you hate doing. So, I sit down over the computer and I get a couple of emails. It actually happened, and one of the people I emailed responded to me. His name is Phil, and hopefully, he and I are finding a time actually, hopefully, to sit down and talk. But I introduced myself. He got back to me. I asked if we could get a coffee, if I could buy him a coffee, if we could sit down and just see if you'd be interested in having a conversation with me, doing an episode with me. And he said sure. So I go. I don't know who this guy is. Never met him before. And of course, if you're a journalist, you hear this, you're like, okay, big deal. It's like what your entire life is. But I'm just getting started in this. And so I go and I meet him, and he's a 70-year-old and wonderful, wonderful man. And he's English, which I totally forgot. So the accent took me by a little bit of surprise at first. And he and I sat down and we talked for an hour and a half, and we had the most wonderful conversation, such a pleasant conversation about music, about his about how he always played, about the music he likes, about my thoughts on what he was saying about growing up playing music as opposed to being adults and starting to learn already, and all these really awesome conversations. Actually, I hope that we'll continue. We'll be able to capture on recording, but um, but I walked away from, so we're talking an hour and a half slips by, literally just slips by. I have no idea what happened. Just happened, it just came and went. And, I get up and I get back, I say, it's so nice to meet you, get his number to schedule the podcast. He gives me a couple of people that he thinks that I enjoy talking to, which is really, really also awesome of him to do. And, I'm going away and I'm sitting in the car and I am so elated, and I'm like, I really feel like I really feel like I found my purpose. Like when I sit down with someone and there's so much to learn, there's so many perspectives to pick up, and the excitement of meeting with someone and not being sure what kind of relationship you'll have, and then you find out that it's positive, and you find out that you have a lot more in common than you ever could have dreamt of when he's 70, English, been a sessions musician for 50 years, and I'm a 29-year-old Jewish kid from New York that just happened to reach out to him, literally by, just totally randomly, coincidentally. And it was incredible. And like, there's something about making that spark and making that connection and making those relationships and having those conversations that I walked away and I really felt like this is what I was like. This is what I'm meant to do. I love this, and I really enjoy it. Um, so I think that was the reason why Adam was created first was because if I think that an enormous part of life, and especially of being a parent at this point, but it's going to be forever, is, but also being a good friend and also being a good human being, being a good teacher, is to understand that you can't give everyone everything that they're going to want or they're going to need in advance, and people have to figure out, in order to get some meaning and value out of their lives, they're going to have to figure out for themselves what it is they need and what it is they want, and what and what they're looking for themselves. And if you just give it to them, then I don't know that you ever can actually get that in a real in as real of a way. Um, I think there's something about, and it's just, I mean, just to think about how, I mean, just to know how true this is. This has been the common theme in literature and storytelling for thousands of years. The feeling, the notion that you have to go through strife and hardships and hard times in order to get through the other side and experience this amazing relief, this amazing reward, this amazing, this incredible value for navigating through pain and darkness and confusion. The consequence is happiness and success and intentionality, like you can never achieve without realizing what it is that you wanted and needed initially. So if Eve was just created with Adam, I don't think that he ever would have experienced that loneliness that would have made him appreciate, love, care for, and even desire, like at all. Like if she was just given to him, I don't even know that he'd be interested in her. So so I think that and it's funny because that's the first that's the first thing we know about human beings. Like that's one of the most primal. That is before they even say any words to one another, before they interact with one another. One of the most primal things that we learn about man is that he kind of has to figure out what it is that he wants to accomplish, and then figure out a way to go about it, and then with the help, the combination of his own efforts and the universe or God or whatever you want, whatever term you want to use. I really don't mind whatever expression you want to use, but we do believe that we do know that there's so that life is a combination of our efforts and a bunch of insane chaotic events that allow us to kind of, working in tandem to accomplish things. So, some days the chaos might lead to a customer finding my website and they have no idea how they even got there, and they weren't necessarily even looking for refurbished equipment from a dealer. They thought they were buying, calling the manufacturer directly, and by some lucky coincidence, I'm working hard. I'm putting in my hard effort. I'm working with the chaos to kind of navigate through it and help manipulate it towards accomplishing what it is I want to accomplish in my life, whether that's making money or the podcast or being a good husband or being a good father. So um, I think that so we need to kind of have that understanding of what we're missing in our lives, and it's good to be missing things in our lives. It's good to not have everything be perfect all the time, because then you have nothing to fight for or work for. I think I really do believe that, and and that's why that's why we're bored. We're flawed, and we always have to change. We always have to grow, and we always have to figure new things out. Um, so yeah, that was a very long monologue on something that I didn't even mean to touch on at all, but it's good. I enjoyed it. So so yeah, I have a couple of other thoughts in general. Um, One of them, I'm going to just continue, I guess, a little bit more down the philosophical, or perspective, or I guess ideology or conversation, would be continuing along the theme of the book that I was mentioning, that I was reading, The Courage to Be Disliked. And what I find myself, I don't know if I find myself agreeing with everything that the book is writing, but I do find the notions to be new and fresh and challenging to my the status quo, to my assumption of the way that things work. And even if I don't agree 100%, I have been getting some kind of, it has been providing a lot of food for thought and giving me a lot of perspective to weigh. So it's been fun. One of the things that he talks about in this book is is anger as a tool, and the authors argue. And again, it's two Japanese authors. I'm sorry, I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but the authors make the argument, according to Alderian psychology, that anger is nothing but a tool that helps us achieve a goal that we wanted. And the example that he gives, there's, again, the book is written as a dialogue between a philosopher and a young man that comes to challenge his ideas. And the young man says, I was with my family and I got, someone woke me up and I was so mad, I just snapped, I couldn't help it, and nothing could be done about it. And the philosopher responded to him and goes, well, it's a good, he goes, you really believe that? He goes, yeah, I was angry and, even though I apologized later, like I couldn't I can't control my actions. Like I got angry and I acted in a way that I don't usually act in, and that sucks. And already I don't find that to be the best argument towards why anger would be justifiable or acceptable. Like to say anger is just something that couldn't be helped, I think has a lot of flaws just on the surface, but I'm not even going to get into that argument. Like, okay, he's trying to make a point. He's trying to emphasize that a lot of people feel that anger is something that just happens and is almost involuntary and you can't control it. And he says, and the philosopher responds, well, it's a good thing they didn't have a knife on you, because if you were angry and you couldn't control this involuntary behavior, then it's a good thing that you didn't stab him. And the kid is like, well, that's a little much, isn't it? That's taking a little far. He's like, no, not at all. What do you mean? If you can't control yourself when you're angry, then what? If you have no license over your behavior, no control over your behavior when you're angry, who cares whether it's going to manifest as you talking, without being able to control your words, or you stabbing someone without being able to control your actions? Like, what's the difference? And even that, sure. I mean, to me, it doesn't sound like I could kind like I think that in terms of that entire back and forth, I bet that if you just examined either statement just a little bit, both of them would kind of fall apart on their own, and they don't really need to be argued. But just for the sake of lubricating the conversation, someone laughed at me for using that term the other day, but I kind of like it. Just in terms of creating the conversation, creating the space for the conversation, you need to have dialogue that, I guess it helps to have dialogue that is, you're just gonna agree to understand where the other person's coming from, whether you agree or not. So he says that. So the philosopher says anger is a tool, and people choose to use it or not. They may not be conscious about whether they choose to use it, but it's a tool that people use or not. And the student says, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, have you ever had the experience of, and me personally, I've had this experience a whole lot in my life, when let's say I come home and I failed a test, or I didn't do the dishes I promised to do, or I left a mess in the house and I left and I came back and my parents came back before me and I wasn't responsible about it, and my mom would get mad and yell at me, hypothetically, right? Not that she hasn't, but she doesn't do it very frequently anymore either, so it's good. So, well, I'm also more responsible, I think. So, my mom would yell at me, and inevitably, every now and then, while she was yelling at me, her phone would ring, and she'd pick up the phone. Hello? Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you? Yeah, things are good. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. I gotta run. And she'd hang up the phone, and then she'd continue to yell at me. Her anger completely dissipated, and when she because it did not help to achieve her current goal, or was not actually in the right context. And then she when she turned her attention back to me, she was able to flip that switch again, and and kind of resume that state of mind, that emotional state, or however you want to describe what people feel like when they're angry. So um, that to me kind of makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking about it a little bit more, and this is one of those cases where I'm kind of going to be blending my prior perspective with this new perspective. But I think that it kind of that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to be thoughtful about this. I'm not saying this with 100% certainty, but I'm saying this with some confidence, and and I'll probably keep on rethinking about this and revisiting this a little bit. But my I think that anger has a couple of problems. Um, I think that we naturally learn that anger is a tool that has two purposes. Number one, it helps us accomplish things that we would not ordinarily do if we were in a stable and content state. So, for example, when I was, oh man, I forgot about the story, but when I was probably, I don't know, 21, 22, no, I was older. I was probably 23 or 24. And I was living in New York. I was working with I'm working with my dad, and we have a customer. And they're customer, and customers. I mean, I don't really blame them, but they like to take advantage of our flexibility and the fact that we're nice people and that we're an informal business, mom and pop kind of shop, and so they won't always pay us necessarily on time for the equipment that they receive when they'll purchase. So a lot of times, they'll purchase half down, and then they'll give us a hard time about the other half. So we like to have either post-dated checks or a credit card form already filled out that we already have their card on file. But occasionally, until we learned about this, we would be stuck for months and months at someone else's mercy. They have the ultrasound machine. We only have half the payment, and then they go ahead and they decide, hey, screw you, pal. We're not going to pay you for another 90 days, 120 days, whatever it is. So there's a customer that we both knew, that my dad and I both knew, and he and he paid us for half the machine. He owed us a lot. And he's one of those people that you give him a finger and he takes an arm. He wanted everything. He didn't want to pay for anything. He wanted, his machine wasn't working properly. He wants a loaner. He's not going to pay until he gets the loaner, or the loaner is repaired, until he gets the original machines back. Blah, 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 giving us all a hard time. And I was like, I was getting really, upset about this. I'm like, this guy owes his money for over, I think at this point it was over a year, maybe even 2 years. It was a very long time. And then he was complaining about his machine. I was like, well, listen, pal, like, if you're going to complain, then you should, like, finish paying, because you owe us the money for, between a year and 2 years. And then, we'll talk about swapping out your machine or repairing it. But right now, you only paid half down. You used the machine for 9, 10 months before you had a problem with it, and you haven't paid us. So, no, you have to come to the office. No. You have to send me a loaner. Now, this guy was about an hour away from the office. This particular customer in New Jersey. I think he was in Edison or Highland Park, that area, Central Jersey area. And I decided to go for a drive. I went over. I couldn't believe I did this, actually. It's one of the scariest things I did. But I was so upset at this guy for jerking us around and treating us this way and not paying us, and complaining, having having the audacity to, like, give us a hard time. So I went to the office, and he wasn't there. And I said to the office manager, hi, I'm here to take a look at the ultrasound machine. I think you guys need it repaired. So they say, okay. So I walk to the back and I take the machine and I take the probes that are the accessories for the machine and I walk out the door. And the doctor came back from his lunch break and he's like, "Where's my ultrasound machine?" And she's like, "Oh no, some tech came, now it's gone." And the guy calls me and he's yelling at me, he's cursing me out. "I can't believe it! You stole this machine! I'll call the cops!" I'm like, "Call the cops, dude." I was like, "Consider this a repo. Pay us an outstanding bill, and we'll get you a machine. We'll get you a machine back right away." And within a day, he had paid us back. He paid us the rest of the balance, and that was the end of it. I am not that kind of human being by any stretch of the imagination. It was so hard for me to walk into the office, pick up something that I knew wasn't, that pick up something that, that this doctor was using that they had no idea that I was coming to take, and walk out with it. And even though, yes, they owed us some money, and yes, it's been had an open invoice for over a year, it's still not, it's far too confrontational and aggressive for anything that I've ever done. But I kind of worked myself up leading up to it into like a real, like I was imagining in my head having a showdown with this doctor and argue with him about the machine because I was expecting to be there when I was take it. Then I went to talk to him about getting paid, and instead of getting paid, I I ended up just taking the machine and getting it back to him. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't work myself up to a certain level of anger or frustration or fuck this guy, excuse my language. Screw this doctor. He's not going to just treat us like this. And I had to work myself up in order to be able to walk into his office and act like that. I wouldn't be able to do that without the tool of being angry. And I would, and I realize this now. I had worked myself up into a state of anger just to be able to accomplish this task of confronting someone, collecting the machine, and being a tough negotiator and trying to get the money back from him. So anger is a tool in one capacity to try and accomplish something that you would not be able to ordinarily do. The other purpose, I believe, is to get other, and I think this is probably the more, I think it's just as common, if not more common, is that people use anger as a tool to get other people to submit to them. Anger could be a form of expressing, I mean, especially anger that leads to results. Anger leads to power, to lead to to having control over other people and have other people submit themselves to you because of the way that you're talking and the way that you're behaving. So people know, and actually, I think it's interesting. I could imagine, although I don't know for certain, that younger and middle siblings that really feel less heard probably are more inclined towards angry outbreaks or having anger management problems because they feel like their whole life is them submitting to other people, and they don't really have the authority of an older sibling or a parent, and they don't really have, they can't really tell other people what to do. Um, and so when they get angry, it's their way of trying to get the world around them to cooperate with them and work with them on what they want. And the problem is, and while that is obviously, listen, I think that we do need people to be able to, in order to accomplish different things, we might have to persuade people of a new perspective or a new understanding. And you can achieve that goal in a number of ways. If I want my students to stop saying the N word, which is seems to be a problem, but if I want them to do it and I yell at them and I get mad, my anger is a method that I'm using to get these students to submit to me in a way that they would not ordinarily have. And but that's only one way of accomplishing my goal. I could still get them to stop saying that word without blowing up at them, without getting mad, without yelling, without saying anything I don't ordinarily say, without treating people the way that I don't ordinarily treat them. I could talk to them rationally. I could give them reasons why it's not good to say that. I could provide historical context as to why the N word is not a great thing for kids to be throwing around. I could I could reinforce it not with anger but with discipline and saying, listen, if you're going to say that, then that's fine. You're going to get thrown out of the class and get a zero for the day, and it's going to have an impact on your report card. And so you're incentivizing them to you're giving them the power and the choice to say, okay, I'm going to behave in my own self-interest, and doing this is not in my self-interest. So you can incentivize people the other way around. But the notion of anger as a tool, I think, is such a fascinating idea, and I think it's true. And I think it's interesting also because in Jewish thought, in Jewish literature, especially Maimonides, Rambam, who's really, really one of the all-time great scholars in mind, I think ever. Forget about just Jews. He had an enormous reputation as a doctor, and I think he lived in Egypt for a while, and I think he was a Pharaoh's doctor. Wherever he lived in Egypt. He lived in the Middle East, and at the time he was very close with the Muslims actually, and which is a shame. I feel like could try to be today, um, and he was considered a respected leader and authority for the entire world, and even till today, his ideas are rigorously appreciated, studied, and he actually studied Aristotle and Plato, which is cool. But one of the things that he says, he goes, and he talks about personality, and he talks about how every personality trait has a flip side, has its flip side. And if someone has too much of one type of tendency to do the work to try to go the other extreme way, and then hopefully between your natural tendencies and then your forced behavior, you kind of find some sort of equilibrium where you could have a healthy balance between the two personality traits. This is the only trait that has no value, that Judaism views to be absolutely beyond abhorrent and has no place for, is anger. And I think that the reason why is exactly these two reasons. To accomplish something, by working yourself into a state of fury and thoughtlessness and just like pure adrenaline and emotion is almost the opposite of what religion tries to teach us, which is a state of enhanced consciousness, not to behave animalistic, and to use our brains to navigate scenarios as opposed to just our raw emotions. So that's already antithetical to a lot of what any kind of religion or philosophy would really dictate. And then on the other hand, getting other people to force them to submit, just because you're doing it verbally doesn't mean that it's not some kind of legitimate form of. I'm trying to think. I don't want to. I want to use the right word, and not the most intense word. But you're forcing someone into doing something without their consent and without their wanting to do it, and you're kind of just using using the state of mind to manipulate people into submitting or scare people into submitting their whether they want to or not. And you know you take out the choice. If you do something to someone and there's no consent and there's no choice behind it, then we generally look down on that behavior. So I think it's really cool, that notion that and you can understand, because so everyone has different goals, and every kind of goal that we have has many different means of achieving them. If someone wants to feel validated, you can feel validated by driving a $150,000 car. But you can also be validated by being a respectable, kind, intelligent, educated, caring, and hardworking individual. So what kind of how are you going to get your validation? How are you going to accomplish your goal? And the means that you go about trying to accomplish your goal and the way that you accomplish it is almost as important as the actual success itself, right? If I accomplish my goal of getting married, I mean, think about if you think about it almost like in terms of Harry Potter, right? You have that love potion, And everyone kind of feels weird about that. Everyone feels weird about this notion of like giving someone this thing that makes them infatuated with them. It's like a weird one-sided coerced relationship, and you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. It's kind of sick. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of bad. Accomplishing your goals, you might be accomplishing your goal. If you love this person and you really want to spend time with this person, you can accomplish your goal of spending time with them. But doing it without their consent and doing it without their participation and doing it while they're under a love potion is not the way. It helps you accomplish your goal, but you don't want your goal to be accomplished that way. So I think it's all really, really, really thought provoking, really interesting, and I'm going to call it this here because I have a lot of other things to do. It's 11:20 on a Wednesday, and I have several things to do today with my job and life and podcast. So, guys, love you all, and I will be back again tomorrow with another episode. Bye, everyone.